Well, after the blisteringly positive video that I just posted for the first part of this lecture, let's take a breath. Breathe it all in, and let's talk about how dull our lives are. Boredom. One of the fundamental aspects of social media culture is how boring it is. I'm not talking about content here. I'm talking about the feeling of boredom that pervades our everyday existence. We are restless, we are bored. And this is designed. Mark Kingwell's book, which is in the reading list for this week in the module handbook, is a very great critical sort of investigation of the boredom of our lives. Now, boredom is all about being stuck. And if we're caught in continual cybernetic loops of up and down with our dopamine, we are stuck effectively, which means also we are bored. Tedium is never alleviated by all efforts, including a Wi-Fi connection to social media. There has to be a break from what we are doing in order for us to alleviate boredom, but we are trapped, therefore we're bored. We're in a stimulus-rich world, but boredom is chronic within it. We are just bored with everything. We're bored with life. It's cruel, and it is the story of our lives, unfortunately. There are different kinds of boredom, and historically, boredom has changed over time. What we have in contemporary society is a form of neoliberal boredom, which relies on the workings of an attention economy, which social media is a critical part of, in which we are willing participants. Boredom and the maintenance of boredom is actually absolutely essential to the economic base of digital society, because we are bored by social media, but our response to that boredom is to go on social media. Now, philosophical boredom, in contrast to that, is as a site of creation. Martin Heidegger, the great German philosopher, talked about angst and our confrontation with boredom itself as a way to create new things and to think about the world in very critical ways and to actually realize what we are as human beings through boredom. Neoliberal boredom isn't about that. Neoliberal boredom is to keep on doing things. It's like capitalist boredom, where the response to it was to buy stuff. Well, in neoliberal boredom, which is what we have in this age, our response is to go back on social media. In philosophy, boredom is the wellspring of philosophizing. So Soren Kierkegaard here, for example, boredom is the principle of all men. There is no escape. But through that, we create, but not in the boredom we experience today. Our boredom is sublimated back to the platform. We go back to what the very thing that makes us bored in order to have more of it. Now, for Heidegger, and there is Heidegger getting some water from his from his pump there. There are three kinds of boredom. There's boredom as waiting, boredom as surprising, boredom as fundamental, covering the expanse of our existence. Time becomes longer for Heidegger in boredom. Time is relative, and when we are bored, time stretches out before us. And a profound sense of boredom becomes homesickness. All creatures actually orient to their home. We can ask ourselves a question in the profoundness of our boredom today through social media. We are constantly bored by what we see. We're constantly bored by what we experience. Where is our home? Home is taken away from us, because we are constantly in this flux, in this ever-changing flow of images and messages which continually cycle over and over with no beginning, no middle, or no end, where we're constantly in this stream of things and we have no home. Philosophically and spiritually, we are homeless because we are continually bored. I said this was going to be intense, right? So, for Kingwell, there are 5 types of boredom. Boredom is philosophical originary, psychoanalytic boredom, political boredom, drawn on the work of Theodor Adorno, creative boredom, and what we have, neoliberal boredom, natural extension of the background conditions of 21st century capitalism. Neoliberal boredom is where we're at. In 21st century capitalism, what this means, in the 20th century, boredom is counted by spending on luxury goods, boredom and capitalism. But for Kingwell, now we produce and consume ourselves under the sign of our own status as both user and consumer. 21st century boredom is relieved by continually reproducing ourselves on social media for likes and attention, and we just keep on doing that. It's not interesting. It doesn't fulfill us in any way, shape or form. it just keeps us in this loop of boredom. But that is important. The alleviation of our boredom is ostensibly to reproduce what makes us bored in the first place. As a prosumer, we are continually bored with reproducing ourselves, but we keep on doing it because it's our only response. Because in a social media world, and in a world where social media is everything to us in terms of the social, this is our only response to boredom. Boredom is even encoded in the interface. So for Kingwell, the interface is that fluid space that joins and allows interaction between platform, content, and user. This is often overlooked when we think about social media. But if you think about interfaces that we have and how they engender a sense of boredom in it, for those of you who use something like Tinder, Grindr, or apps like this, the swipe or gesture is key to this. So if you use Tinder or Bumble, right? Okay. What do? You swipe left, you swipe right. Swipe left, swipe right, swipe left, swipe right. We're not even engaging with the symbol anymore in any meaningful sense. It's just this rapid motion that we have that we continually do over and over again. Finger flips or swipes are a form of restless choosing between things. They never end. Our stream of potential hookups on these apps, they never end. We're just continually swiping back and forth. The interface is not necessarily addictive in that way, because since it functions as a deferral of desire and a deferral of desire satisfaction, combined with a substitution of its mechanism for the original desire. This desire, I mean, if you think about some people's route for using Tinder, for example, is to hook up, right? The interface itself just replaces that desire to hook up with an endless stream of just flicking back and forth, flicking back and forth. The interface itself is dull. It's boring. The gesture is totally mundane. But we become accustomed to it. It becomes our sociability. It becomes our dating life. Swiping left or swiping right. The boredom is coded into these things. So in terms of social media interfaces, and I think Tinder is a form of social media, by the way, but when we scroll and swipe, it is the act of scrolling and swiping that becomes addictive through pleasure. One can never come to the end of such an experience. There's always more. When in the interface, we are worse off than a drug addict. Social media is not satisfying to us even momentarily. We have to keep on doing it over and over again. And the tedium of our lives is just continually going through these meaningless streams of information. No beginning, no middle, no end, no conclusion, no moral. Just a continual never-ending stream of stuff which we scroll because we're addicted to that motion of scroll, swipe, scroll, adding nothing to the experience of the world that we have. I had a thought that this video would be kind of brighter than the last one, but it's really not going that way, is it? So we're moved to evade the grip of this endless boredom by further stimulus rather than reflection on the nature of our inner conflict, which is going on when we're bored. We're just mesmerized by the repetition of what we're presented with. So neoliberal boredom, the boring interface consumed in the place of any content. We don't care what people say on Tinder. We don't look at their profiles. We cast a cursory glance at their image and we just make an instantaneous decision. But we're addicted to the interface and to the swipe, rather than the content that we're being presented with. And this is deeply entwined with modes of capitalist production in the 21st century. We are there to interact, to provide data, which is then sold on to others. Our engagement is just the engagement of our attention, no matter how brief it is, in order for us to be sold and to have things sold to us. It keeps you bored in order to make you into a more pliant consumer and product. What does that tell us about culture? Culture is now, according to Jean Baudrillard, only a free play of empty signifiers and random spectacles that reinforce current interests. There is no deeper meaning to culture. It is simply a replay of the same thing over and over and over again, because these things are empty in design. These things are empty at base and at root. There is nothing to be learned from any of this. There is no spiritual end to any of this. I don't have to be talking about social media here. I could be talking about reality television, you know? I could be talking about Love Island. I could be talking about well, is it called This Is Chelsea, whatever it's called? I can't even remember the names of these things because, you know, they're so mundane and boring and just cataclysmically soul-destroying as spectacles. For Baudrillard, that is culture. All culture is now just an empty play of signifiers and random spectacles, which we are trapped in, we can't see outside of. The real, as I said in the previous video, has been replaced by these random spectacles. The virtual now takes the place of the real, and we are not in contact with the real at all. We have, therefore, with boredom and this continual spectacle, what we could call everyday zombiehood, a structural despair to our lives. Individual experience of boredom and desperation to relieve it through technology are the symptoms of a pathology, because boredom is chronic. It is a pathology in itself, and we are zombies. We are just bored individuals searching out meaningless interactions through social media in order to alleviate the boredom which has been caused by these systems in the first place. Systems have engendered this boredom in us, but we just search back onto them to alleviate the boredom. Those of you who are thinking about, I don't know what to do with my project. You know, I go on Instagram, but I don't post anything on Instagram. I go on TikTok, but I don't post anything on TikTok. I go on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter. This is what you're doing. Your life on social media is just consumption of this never-ending stream of symbolic interplay, which is never going to change. It has no meaning. It's just there to capture your attention over time so you can be marketed to, and you can be marketed as a product to other people. So if you were struggling for an idea, maybe you want to get into the everyday zombiehood of your life on social media. It won't be a particularly cheery experience, but I think there's a project there for you. Let's go darker, because I don't feel this collection of videos has nearly been dark enough at this point. Let's go into nihilism and my good friend Nolan Gertz. Gertz has written 2 excellent books on nihilism, and they're both in the reading list for this. Gertz draws on the work of the great German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. We make ourselves busy to avoid finding ourselves. What nihilism means is not, I believe in nothing. I believe in nothing. It kind of does mean that, but not in the sense that you might think. It means that your belief system is empty because you have no interest in finding yourself in the world. We are completely sick of ourselves, we're sick of the world, and nihilism is a weariness about the world itself. It is a cheery disposition to ask no questions and just accept your fate as it is, and to accept the world as it's presented to you and not engage with it. Just nod along. It is the you-okay hun of mental states, and it is endemic in our social media world. Nihilism just exists everywhere, unquestioning, a weariness towards existence itself, which manifests itself in an inability to critically engage with the world around us. Nihilism really refers to how the beliefs we have are the equivalent of nothing. They are meaningless. It's not a belief in nothing, but it is, you are a nihilist if the beliefs you have are the equivalent of absolutely nothing. They're inconsequential. So pessimism and cynicism are not nihilistic. I'm a cynicist, right? I'm a pessimist. That's not nihilism, but it can lead to nihilism if we turn our pessimism and cynicism into mindless optimism. Nihilism is much closer to optimism than pessimism, but it is a mindless optimism. Everything will be okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Don't stress. Live, laugh, love. The most nihilistic statement ever made. And if you know somebody, or you have seen one of those ridiculous stickers that people put on their walls in their homes, live, laugh, love, you must burn down their house. There is no other response to this level of nihilism in the world. You must get rid of it. You must tear it down. Nihilism is about evading reality rather than confronting it. And social media is the perfect medium for this nihilistic response to avoid reality. As Baudrillard argues, we're not in contact with reality on social media, where it's already doing some of this work for us. And therefore, to be engaged with it in its entirety at all times means we are taking a nihilistic stance towards the world, especially if our nihilistic cheeriness characterizes our everyday interactions. Nihilism is closely related to boredom. Nihilism emerges as a response to the angst of boredom. We become cheery in our social media use. We become upbeat. We don't engage with our boredom anymore. We look to avoid it by becoming as positive as possible. So the immersion of ourselves in everyday life through social media is a way of evading angst, and that is in itself nihilistic. The acceptance of all this stuff is nihilism. Your belief system becomes meaningless. You are just engaged in social media and nothing else. Check how much time you're spending on social media per week. Have a look. Does social media produce nihilism? Well, it is hypnotic, it is a mechanical activity, it's petty pleasure, and it is herd forming. These self-hypnosis techniques are key to nihilism for Nietzsche. If something does these things, then yeah, it is nihilistic itself. And before I go any further, just check out the moustache. I mean, that's magnificent. I mean, the dude, I mean, he had the style. For Nietzsche, orgies of feeling, the fifth symptom of self-hypnosis, is very, very critical in terms of nihilism. Things which provoke mass anger, mass fear, mass emotion are orgies of feeling. They're empty. The feelings underpinning them are totally empty. But you think of pile-on mobs on social media, you think of responses where everyone is horrified by something on social media, but you're horrified from a distance. You're not even engaged in the events themselves. You're just completely horrified from afar. And you're signaling that horror along with everyone else on your platform, everyone else in your bubble on social media. This is an orgy of feeling, and social media clearly does this. This is a sign of nihilistic response. The tendency to turn away from life itself, the horrors of life and the challenges of life, is nihilistic. It is nihilism. Our everyday social media practices are a turning away from life. The endless scrolling, the endless swiping, the endless liking, the endless commenting without any real content to that comment, the endless posting, the endless doing all of this is a turning away from reality and life. Passive nihilism means you stop asking questions at all. You stop being a human being, effectively. Human beings are there to be. To be is an activity. Passivity in this sense means you stop being human itself. You're putting yourself asleep to avoid the pain of the world. And the world is painful, and it is bleak, and it is wonderful, and it's amazing. It's great to experience. And we're not doing any of that when we spend our lives on social media. I mean, Gates particularly looks at Tinder in the context of this, when, you know, we nihilistically are addicted to judgment on others. Swipes as a nihilistic embodiment of social media. The very gesture is a gesture of nihilism in itself. And there is no value to anything on Tinder beyond petty aesthetic value, which you know isn't real anyway. You know this is best foot forward stuff. You know that there are filters used. You know the person, when you meet them after you've swiped with them and you've matched and you've chatted, you know they're not going to look anything like that, but you've been drawn in by the petty aesthetic of it and your boredom with the interface. And this is just pure nihilism. Any value that people might have is completely subsumed by their appearance. You swipe the wrong way on people who might bring value to your lives, but you don't care because you don't think about that. Because you're not engaged with the world. You engage with the interface. You engage with your boredom. You're actually swiping away the world when you swipe on Tinder. These are the very roots of despair in our society. In Richard Seymour's great The Twittering Machine, He argues that everything is writing and the horror is not the technology but the user itself. What social media has done is reconfirm writing and text as our primary mode of expressing ourselves. The horror is not in the technology but in us. Our lives are just now an electronic text. We're disadvantaged with not part of that electronic text, but we are text nevertheless. The machine is not the infrastructure, but the machinery of writers and writing and the feedback loops that they inhabit. What we encounter in our feeds is hedonistic simulation to manage emotion. Hedonistic stimulation, I should argue. We must create new identities on an entrepreneurial basis at all times. The machine, the social media machine, encourages us to continually make and remake our very existences to prevent us from being bored. But we simply get more and more bored all the time. But our engagement in doing this is exactly what the machine wants. It just wants us locked in order to produce more and more profit for that machine. The like button in a Facebook is designed for good, but it became cybercrack. Social media basically is an operant conditioning chamber. The machine keeps us needy and guessing, or as Adam Greenfield calls it, there are jittery schizoid intervals with constant updates. We are nothing more than lab rats in this machine, kept bored, but continually pressing the button to get stimulation without leaving the machine itself. We are continually bored. So, social media culture, what is it? Let's wrap this up. A culture that is alienating, causes boredom and despair. Nihilism. You definitely need to consider all of this when analysing your social media use. This was great fun for me. I'm sure it was great fun to watch. I look forward to the seminar for discussing this all with you. Cheers, guys.